Welcome to today's deep dive. We're going to try something a little different. Instead of our usual routine, we're going to put on our tool belts and step onto a virtual construction site. Well, virtual at least.
Yeah, just imagine sawdust in the air, the sounds of power tools, that sort of thing, and the pressure of a tight deadline.
Okay, so maybe not all the fun parts of construction, but we're going to be deconstructing the language and culture of construction today.
Right, we'll be looking at a YouTube video. It's called English Boost, Level Up Your Skills.
Yeah.
English Podcast Conversation, episode 24, from the channel Podcast Speak English.
Perfect. So in this video, they're talking about building a deck in just one day.
Ambitious.
Yeah, and they just throw around terms like nail gun and 2x4.
Yeah, like it's nothing.
Like we all know what those are. So for those of us who are more familiar with putting together furniture from, that certain Swedish retailer.
Yeah.
What actually makes these tools so important on a real construction site?
Well, I'll tell you what, they're definitely not assembling flat pack furniture. Take a nail gun, for example. It's like a supercharged hammer. It uses compressed air to drive nails really fast and really hard. Really essential for big projects like framing a house.
Definitely sounds a lot more powerful than your average DIR needs.
Absolutely. Although I've got to say, even I've had my fair share of mishaps with those things.
I can imagine. Now, when they mention 2x4 in the video, they're not using some secret code, are they?
Not quite a secret code, but it is kind of shorthanding construction. 2x4 refers to the dimensions of a piece of lumber. So 2 inches high, 4 inches wide. It's the standard size for almost everything. Framing, building decks, pretty much anything you can think of. It's kind of like the workhorse of lumber, you could say.
Okay, so it's the go-to building block. And listening to the video, I can hear the sound of a circular saw. Is that another one of those must-have tools?
Oh, for sure. Especially for a project like this. A circular saw uses a round blade, that spins obviously, to cut through wood. It's much faster and more efficient than just using a regular handsaw, especially for longer cuts.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I'm sure after all that sawing comes the sanding. They emphasize in the video how important sanding is for smoothing wood so you can avoid those painful splinters.
Right, sanding is key. Nobody wants to end up with, tiny shards of wood embedded in their fingers.
Absolutely not. So what is it about a sander that makes that process faster and less ouch-inducing?
Well, a sander's basically a power tool with sandpaper attached to it. And it just makes sanding way smoother and more efficient than doing it by hand.
So it's like a power-up for sandpaper. And of course, there's the ever-important measuring tape and level, which they also mentioned in the video. Those are pretty standard tools, right? You find them in pretty much any toolbox.
Oh yeah, they're standard for sure.
Yeah.
But don't underestimate their importance. A level makes sure that everything is straight and plumb.
Yeah.
And the measuring tape helps you make accurate cuts and make sure things are placed correctly. Because in construction, precision is super important. There's really no room for error.
Right, I can imagine. Speaking of avoiding errors, they also talk about a carpenter's rule of thumb, which makes it sound more like a friendly suggestion than an actual rule.
Yeah, you're right. A rule of thumb is just a general principle that's based on experience, not a strict rule. The specific one they mention is measure twice, cut once.
Right, that's a classic. Always double check your measurements so you don't end up with costly mistakes.
Yeah.
Kind of reminds me of that saying, look before you leap, but in this case, it's measure before you cut.
Exactly. Doesn't matter if you're a professional carpenter or just, a weekend DIY warrior. That rule really shows how important careful planning and execution is in any project.
That's true. Now, beyond just the tools and techniques, they also talk about taking pride in your work, which seems to go a little bit beyond just getting the job done.
Oh, for sure. It implies going the extra mile, paying attention to the details, striving for quality, and feeling that, sense of accomplishment when the job is done well.
So it's more about the mindset, the attitude you bring to the work.
Absolutely.
Not just checking things off a to-do list.
It's about creating something you can actually be proud of.
And speaking of pride in one's work, the video mentions DIY culture, which seems to be especially strong in North America. Is that just about saving money, or is there more to it?
Yeah, you're right. It's not just about being frugal. I mean, DIY is practically a cultural ideology here. You can even argue that it's rooted in, that North American frontier spirit of self-reliance and ingenuity.
Interesting. So it's like a modern-day manifestation of that pioneer spirit.
Yeah, you could see it that way. But I think it also taps into that desire to push back against mass production.
Yeah.
Yearning to create something unique and personal with your own two hands.
Yeah, that makes sense. There's definitely a satisfaction that comes from creating something yourself. And I can only imagine that's amplified when it's something as significant as building a deck. Is that a common DIY project in North America?
Oh yeah, for sure. Decks are super popular, especially in areas with nice weather. They add to your living space, give you a place to relax, entertain, and enjoy being outside.
So it's like adding another room, but without the walls and a roof.
Exactly. And building a deck uses a whole bunch of different skills, from carpentry and measuring to using all those tools we were talking about earlier.
So it's like a pretty good test of your DIY abilities then.
I guess you could say that. It takes planning, precision, and definitely some sweat equity. But the end result can be super rewarding.
Yeah. And another thing is, don't forget about the social aspect. Building a deck is often like a group effort. Friends and family come help out. You share tools, knowledge, and maybe a few laughs along the way. So it's more than just hammering and sawing. It becomes a bonding experience. I can just picture it. A group of friends, a cooler full of drinks, maybe a barbecue going. It's like a construction-themed party.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's a huge part of DIY culture in North America. It's about community and camaraderie, just as much as it is about getting the work done.
And I bet that feeling of accomplishment when you're done, it must be amplified when you're working together.
Oh, absolutely.
There's just something special at looking at a finished project and knowing you built it literally with your own two hands
For sure.
and with the help of friends.
It's a real, tangible representation of shared effort and creativity. And, that feeling of pride. It extends beyond just the project itself.
What do you mean?
What affects how you see the space you've created.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, it's no longer just a deck. It's a place filled with memories of, the building process, the challenges you overcame, the fun you had with friends. It adds a whole new layer of meaning to it.
That's a really great point. I'm starting to see how DIY is more than just the practical stuff. It's about creativity, community, a sense of accomplishment.
It's definitely a multifaceted thing. And actually, this specific project they're talking about in the video, building a deck, it highlights another interesting aspect of construction.
Oh, and what's that?
The idea of working with the environment. When you're building a deck, you're not just creating something brand new, you're integrating it into the existing landscape.
So you're saying you have to work with what's already there.
Right. You're working with the terrain, existing structures, even trees and plants.
So there's this element of respecting and adapting to the environment.
Exactly. It's not just about forcing your will onto the environment. It's about finding that harmony between your vision and, the natural world.
That's a really interesting perspective. It's like construction becomes a collaboration with nature.
Yeah, you could see it that way. And that respect for the environment, I think, is becoming more and more important in construction these days.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. People are a lot more aware of, sustainability and their impact on the planet.
Right. And that awareness is starting to influence all sorts of things, from the materials we use to the designs we create.
So it's not just about building something that looks nice, it's about building something that's good for the planet too.
Exactly. It's about thinking about the long-term impact of what we create and making choices that are both aesthetically pleasing and environmentally responsible.
That's a really great point. We've talked about a lot in this deep dive so far, from the specifics of tools and techniques to the bigger picture, the cultural and environmental implications of construction. It's kind of amazing how something as simple as building a deck can lead to such a wide-ranging discussion.
It is fascinating, isn't it? How these seemingly ordinary points of our lives can reveal so much about our values, our history, and our relationship with the world.
Yeah, well said. It's like we've peeled back the layers of this seemingly simple task and found a whole web of interconnected ideas and concepts underneath.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what I love about these deep dives. It's all about going beyond the surface and exploring the deeper meaning and significance behind things.
And speaking of going deeper, they mention a phrase in the video that caught my ear: give 110%. Obviously, they don't mean that literally.
Right.
But what does that tell us about their attitude toward this deck building project?
Well, it's about a commitment to excellence, a willingness to go above and beyond, pushing yourself to the limit, and trying to achieve the best possible outcome.
So it's not just about putting in the hours, it's about the effort, the focus, the dedication to doing the best job possible.
Exactly. It's about having a strong work ethic and wanting to exceed expectations.
And that attitude, that commitment to excellence, it seems to connect really well with what we talked about earlier, about taking pride in your work.
Oh, definitely. They're two sides of the same coin. When you take pride in your work,
Yeah.
you naturally want to give it your all, to go that extra mile.
So it's not just about the end result. It's about the journey, the process, the effort you put in.
Exactly. It's about the satisfaction you get from knowing you've given it your all, no matter what the outcome is.
And that sense of satisfaction, that feeling of accomplishment, it seems like a big part of the DIY experience.
You got it. It's about more than just the finished product. It's about personal growth, feeling empowered, the joy of creation. That comes with doing it yourself.
It's like a reminder that we're capable of more than we think.
Absolutely. It's about tapping into that inner creator, that inner problem solver, and realizing that we have the power to shape our world, even in small ways.
And that sense of agency, that feeling of control, that seems especially important today when so much feels outside of our control.
I agree. In a world of mass production and instant gratification, DIY is a way to reconnect with the tangible, to reclaim a sense of autonomy and self-sufficiency.
It's like a counterbalance to the digital age, a way to ground ourselves in the physical world and experience the satisfaction of creating something real, something lasting.
Exactly. It's a way to step away from the screens, engage with our hands and minds, and create something real that we can see, touch, interact with.
And that tangible creation, that physical manifestation of our efforts, it becomes a source of pride, a testament to our abilities, and a reminder of the joy of creating something with our own two hands.
Beautifully said.
Yeah.
We are makers, we are builders, and we have the power to shape our world, one project at a time.
You know, it's funny, we've done more than just define construction terms today. We've really gotten into the culture and the values behind all of it. Who knew a deep dive into building a deck could be so revealing?
It really is fascinating.
Yeah.
It's like these simple terms and tasks, they're like little windows into a whole way of life.
And for our listener,
Yeah.
even if they never actually pick up a hammer, this deep dive gives them a whole new perspective. It's like we've decoded a secret language or something,
Right.
and given them access to this community they might not have really understood before.
Exactly. They might even see those home improvement shows differently now. It's not just about fixing a leaky faucet anymore.
Right.
They're showcasing a whole cultural phenomenon.
And those huge home improvement stores, they're not just selling tools and lumber, they're supplying a whole DIY ecosystem.
Exactly. And that ecosystem, it thrives on all the values we've been talking about. Self-reliance, ingenuity, the satisfaction of creating something with your own two hands.
It makes you think about those people you see at the lumberyard on a Saturday morning. They're not just there to pick up supplies, they're embarking on a journey of creation, maybe even a little bit of self-discovery.
And they're contributing to a tradition. That's a really deep part of North American culture.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, what's the takeaway for our listener? What do we want them to remember?
Well, I think the most important thing to remember is that construction is about so much more than just hammers and nails. It's a reflection of our values, our history, our relationship with the environment, even our desire for self-expression.
And even if our listener never actually builds a deck themselves, understanding this culture gives them a new way to see the world. Right.
They might appreciate the craftsmanship in their own homes differently, or see those DIY projects in a whole new light.
Exactly. And hopefully, this deep dive sparked a little curiosity in our listener. Maybe they'll feel inspired to try a small project of their own, or just appreciate the effort and skill that goes into creating the spaces we live in.
Yeah, maybe they'll even look at that honey-do list a little differently.
Maybe, but if they do decide to try a DIY project, I think there's one last piece of advice we should give them.
Oh, what's that?
Don't be afraid to ask for help. Remember all that stuff we talked about with the social aspect? DIY can be a really great way to connect with other people, to learn from each other, and to create something meaningful together.
That's really great advice. After all, even the most skilled builders didn't start out as experts. Everyone needs a little help sometimes.
Exactly. And that shared experience, that collaborative effort, it can make the whole journey even more rewarding.
So to wrap things up, let's leave our listener with a question to think about.
If you were going to try a DIY project, big or small, what would it be? And who would you invite to join you on that creative adventure?
That's a great question. It really gets them thinking about their own creativity and the power of community to make those ideas a reality.
Well said. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the world of construction. We hope you've learned something new about the craft, the culture, and the values that shape this incredible field.
It was my pleasure. Until next time, keep those creative sparks flying.